issues of global significance. It was a very constructive exercise.
Kemi Bader then offered Keir Starmer a suggestion.
Will the Prime Minister show his government can be more than student politicians by asking you, Mr. Speaker, to extend an invitation to President Trump to address Parliament on his next visit?
I think the Leader of the Opposition is giving a masterclass on student politics. We live in probably more volatile world than we've lived in for many decades. It is absolutely crucial that we have a strong relationship, that strong special relationship forged in difficult circumstances between the US and the UK. We will continue to work, as we have done in the 4 months in government, on issues of security, our economy and global conflict.
The Lib Dem leader asked about Mr. Trump's possible stance on the war in Ukraine.
That the US will not oppose President Putin and support our brave Ukrainian allies. The UK must lead in Europe so that together we do.
Keir Starmer insisted the UK would continue to back Ukraine, but from European security to global trade, the government is braced for a presidency that will have an impact here. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer had earlier congratulated Donald Trump on what he called this historic victory. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is in Westminster this lunchtime. And Chris, what's your assessment? What do you think a second Trump presidency means for what we call that special relationship?
Yes, hello to you, John. I think a real sense on our programme today of how politics is being recast and remoulded, both here at home at Westminster with the arrival of Kemi Bader as Conservative leader, and then President-elect Trump on the international stage. You'll hear lots of references in the coming days to the quote-unquote special relationship. And yes, there are elements of that relationship between London and Washington that are long-standing and do transcend whoever happens to be Prime Minister and whoever happens to be President. But we shouldn't underestimate just what a big moment this is. There was a wonderful phrase this morning from Lord Hammond, the former Conservative Foreign Secretary, telling the BBC that there would be deep breath time in Whitehall. A splash of understatement there, not because people here hadn't war-gamed a potential outcome where Donald Trump won. They had, but there can be a difference between a hypothetical and a reality, and there can be a difference between plans that are made and their contact with reality. We're about to find out just what that difference looks like.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Of course, it's not just Westminster. The world has been reacting to Donald Trump's return to the White House. In a moment, we'll speak to Steve Rosenberg, who's in Sochi, James Waterhouse, who's in Kyiv. But first, let's speak to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Jerusalem. And Lise, what do you think this second Trump presidency is going to mean for the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, John, it was not surprising that of all the world leaders to congratulate Donald Trump, it was the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu who was so quick off the mark. And also noticeable is that it wasn't just the kind of political message that we saw Sir Keir Starmer sending. It was warm, it was personal, it was addressed to Melania and Donald Trump, signed in true friendship from Benjamin and his wife, Sarah. All of the Israeli political leaders have not just hailed this huge victory by Donald Trump, as they put it, but also this very long, strong strategic partnership between Israel and the United States. This is the result that the vast majority of Israelis wanted. They remember how in Donald Trump's first term, he backed most of Israel's long-standing, including moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, when it comes to Arab leaders, they also have spoken about the long strategic relationship between their country and the United States, but there's a consistent thread there as well. All of them to a leader, whether it's the president of Egypt, the emir of Qatar, the king of Jordan, the Palestinian president, all of them urged Donald Trump to bring peace and security to the region. And that, John, is the big question now. Will Donald Trump, president, he boasts that he is the peacemaker, the man who wants to end wars, not start them? Or will he give his strategic partner, including his close friend Benjamin Netanyahu, an even freer hand to keep waging those destructive wars in Gaza and in Lebanon, and also, crucially, to hit Iran even harder.
Lise, thank you for that assessment from the Middle East. Let's speak to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. He's in Sochi. And Steve, how is Mr. Trump's re-election, his victory, being received in the Kremlin?
I'll tell you, John, what was really interesting today, that seems to be going out of its way.
So ito po mga palangga, no, actually, ito po ay final na po, no, yung pagkapanalo po ni new elect President Trump, no. At kanina lang ay tumawag po si dating President Rodrigo Duterte upang pag-congratulate kay Donald Trump. So subaybayan po natin.
To give the impression that it's not excited by Donald Trump's victory. A Kremlin spokesman today said, as far as he knows, there are no plans for President Putin to congratulate Donald Trump. Don't forget, he said, that America is an unfriendly country which is involved directly and indirectly in a war with Russia. Part of the reason for this sort of downbeat reaction, I think, is what happened the last time Donald Trump was in power. In 2016, the Kremlin had very high hopes that President Trump would improve US-Russian relations. It didn't happen. There's no doubt that what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail and what he didn't say would have gone down well with the Kremlin. So I think we can expect...
So isa pa dito po mga kabayan, no? Ito po nakakalungkot eh. Kaya po na marami po ang kumampi o bumoto kay Donald Trump kasi ito ang ano kasi ni Donald Trump, parang katulad po ni dating Pangulong Duterte. Ayaw talaga ng gera. So kaya ito po nga nangyari po ngayon sa China. Marami kasi sa ating mga kababayan na ano bang dapat natin gawin? Ibigay na lang natin yung sa China, yung Philippine Sea. Actually, sinabi ko naman talaga, yung Philippine Sea, matagal na talaga yung problema na yan. Panahon pa yan ni Aquino hanggang kay Estrada. Pagdating kay Estrada ay pinaalis po yung mga Amerikano. Kaya po na matagal ako nakatira doon po sa Clark Air Base noon. Kasi ang makatira doon sa Clark Air Base yung mga retired Air Force. So yun mga pwede makatira po doon. Kaya ang problema dito sa mga loyalista ay pilit nila na isisi kay dating Pangulong Duterte. Kung titingnan po natin yung problema kasi sa Philippines, matagal na talaga yun. At bakit naging aggressive ang China na binuntutan yung ating Philippine Coast Guard, hinaharas po tayo. Bakit noon sa panahon ni Duterte hindi po yun? Dahil yung pong isa pong rason kung bakit na aggressive ang China, yung paglagay po ng mga EDCA site. Para bang tayo ba ay naghamon po tayo ng gira eh. Now, sabi nila, paano lang kung lulusubin tayo na? Kung ang China ay may balak pa na lumusob sa Pilipinas, noon pa man sa panahon ni Estrada eh. Kasi pinaalas na po yung mga Amerikano. Kaya ngayon, nakita po natin yung sa Russia. At yun na, nag-congratulate pa. Kasi alam kasi nila na si Donald Trump ayaw talaga ng gira. Kasi ang tinitingnan kasi ni Donald Trump at saka ito po ni former President Duterte, yung taong bayan, kawawa talaga tayo. At kung makagira po ang North Korea at ang China, madadamay naman talaga tayo. At ang mangyayari po dito sa Pilipinas, gagawin po ito ng battleground. Maniwala po kayo. Kaya marami po ang nagano kay Donald Trump kasi ayaw talaga ng gira. Walang manalo sa gira. Ang kawawa dito ang taong bayan. Kaya patuloy po tayo pag-ingat po natin.
Well with the Kremlin. So I think we can expect moves to improve that relationship.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Let's go to our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse, who's in Kyiv. And James, what's the mood in Ukraine then following this news about Donald Trump returning to the White House?
Well, hearing Steve and Lise there, I think President Zelensky will both want to keep fighting this war, which entirely depends on help from the US, and he will be desperate to form some kind of functioning relationship with Donald Trump. Now, he was early to congratulate him as well. He described a great meeting they both had in New York, and he was trying to sell his country. He was describing the economic and political opportunities, a partnership between Donald Trump and himself, what that could provide. But these are incredibly uncertain times. American support has been laid out for the coming months by the administration in terms of armoured vehicles, but beyond that, we just don't know. If Donald Trump is turned down by Russia for any kind of peace negotiation, then he might step up support for Ukraine, and that is the very faint hope here this morning.
James Waterhouse there with the view from Kyiv, speaking to my colleague John Kay. You're live with BBC News. I'm Anna Foster here in Washington, D.C., just coming round to 8:30 in the morning as America wakes up to a result which came far quicker than I think many people were anticipating. They thought it could be, as it was back in 2020, a case of days before we knew who the next president would be. But in the early hours of this morning, it was confirmed Donald Trump, and it looks like he's taken potentially a complete sweep of those crucial swing states. So let's get reaction from two of them just now, Arizona and Pennsylvania. Joining me from Phoenix is the broadcaster Gail Bass, and from Pittsburgh we're joined by Marty Griffin, who's host of the conservative leading radio station KDKA. Good morning to both of you, the morning after the night before. Gail, to you first of all, what do you make not just of this result, but of the decisive nature of it?
Well, you know, the last time that George W. Bush won a second time, the first time he didn't win the popular vote, the second time that he did, I think that there is a grievance culture in America where you have two sides. We are very divided. And the other side was not paying attention to the tea leaves because they're saying, you know, this is economic prosperity. Sorry. The wind just flew across my camera.
Don't worry.
So I think that people think that it's going to be a return to what they wanted the first time because we went through an economic crisis. And if you read what The Economist says, Biden got us out of that. But people didn't see that. They don't see that. They're saying now it's a return to prosperity. But if you look at the economic reports, it is what it is. Plus, you know, it was a hard charge for an African-American woman to win this election, especially when she had an unpopular person going in before her. She had 3 months to run. She raised over $1 billion, but it just wasn't enough.
Marty, you've been talking to people on your show day in, day out for weeks, for months. What were the key issues that were really driving their vote this time round?
Look, I grew up here. Born and raised, family, immigrants from Italy and Ireland, the old country, as we like to say. And your average Pittsburgher, we call them Yinzers. What does that mean? It's a dialect. Hey, Yin's going down to vote for Harris. And here's what Pittsburghers, union folks, lifelong Democrats said, I ain't voting for no Kamala Harris. I ain't voting for no Democrat. And that's what happened. And by the way, this is historic. Let me throw a couple numbers at you.
Marty,
union guys, and I mean
before you do, Marty, I'm really keen to dig in. They said that they were never going to vote Democrat, but what is the thing?
So ito pa mga palangga, ito pa. Imagine si Donald Trump nanalo. Now, ngayon po yung nagtatanong na sana Sir Bob ay mabigyan pa si dating Pangulong Duterte ng lakas. Kaya sabi ko nga, ipagdasal po natin. Kung sakali man na mabigyan pa siya ng karagdagang lakas, 100% mananalo pa rin yan. Ang mangyayari kung tatakbo si Inday Sara bilang president, tatakbo din si Digong bilang vice president. And then, hindi natin alam ano yung kamaraan nila. So, ang mangyayari, babalik si Digong. Yung mga po sa Quadcom, maglayasan talaga yan. Kaya yung po mangyayari, imagine na Donald Trump nanalo yan. So, malaki ang tendency mananalo pa rin Tatay Digong.
What is the thing that makes them so reluctant to change sides? What are the things that keep them Republican?
No. They never voted Republican in their lives. They've been Democrat for 70 years. 70 years. This is historic. This is massive. And I'll tell you what it was. It was money. And they said, to hell with her. And I'm serious about this. They said, to hell with the Progressive Party. Let me throw a number at you. They polled union guys, and I'm talking about hard coal truckers, coal miners, steel workers. At least half who have voted Democrat their entire lives voted for Trump this time. Can I read a couple of texts that came in from players? And when I say players, I mean big shots, guys that matter. And these are the highs and lows, and this is the still divided America. From a very, very successful attorney. Look at your stock portfolio today, because as you know, stock futures are way up. This is from a high-ranking political leader. Marty, 78-year-old convicted felon that's basically certifiably insane. This is verbatim. Beats a 60-year-old progressive black female that wants to pay for prisoners' transgender sex operations and has done nothing the past 4 years as vice president, especially with borders, etc. One more, please. Is a lifelong Democrat, someone that I went to high school with, and he's always voted Democrat. Very, very successful in real estate. Look, quote, Marty, America's a much better place today. If you leave the proximity of the city of Pittsburgh, it's all Republican. And I mean just about the entire state is red. Dramatic shift and a pushback against progressives, quite frankly, big time.
Gail, let's just pick up, particularly on some of those text messages that Marty was talking about there, some of the ideas, the understandings that people had about Kamala Harris's campaign, some suggestions there, not anything that she was ever talking about or promising during the campaign. Where do you think the divide was? Why didn't that message that she was putting across, that message of positivity that she was trying to put across, why didn't that resonate in these swing states?
Well, it was a culture war, and think about it. You know, you had Trump going on like bro shows, and she was trying to be above the fray and do what we used to do, and just basically talk to TV stations and radio stations. And the game has changed, and he is right. You know, my dad is from Pittsburgh. He was a union guy before he moved to California before I was born, and I see with union people in California and Arizona. Arizona's a right-to-work state. You don't have to join the union. I was surprised growing up, coming to realize that there were union people who would vote for Republicans. I just thought it wasn't done because my dad was from Pittsburgh. They all voted Democratic. But there is a sea change about how people feel about things, and they see things that they think, well, that's not the way we want to go. Yes, Arizona, where I am, they have made sure that women have the right to choose. They put it in the Constitution. But as far as the economy, they think things are going to be better under Trump, where the fact is, we were not economically doing well under Trump when he left office during the pandemic, and Joe Biden helped us crawl back. And economists will tell you when Democrats go into office, they do better with the economy. People did not see that message, and that's just it. All they heard were ads saying she wants to pay for transgender the transgender operations while people are in prison. And people in America think when you go to jail, you don't get any rights like that.
Gail Bass in Phoenix, Marty Griffin in Pittsburgh, thank you for joining us. Lucy, what I think is really interesting today is because we've spoken, haven't we, over weeks, over months, to people, to voters all across the US here on BBC News. And it's really interesting, I think, to see which of those messages resonated with people. You know, which ones, as Gail was describing there, really cut through. And I think at the bottom of all of this, and certainly people I've been speaking to here, when it came down to it, it came down to the economy. I think for so many people, when that moment came yesterday, for the ones who were voting in person, when they were pressing that button on the electronic voting machine, the thing that really drove their vote was how well off they feel, how much it costs to fill their car with gas, how far their wages are going. And in the end, the personalities, all of those things are important, but it really comes down to those basic issues, doesn't it, wherever you are in the world? Indeed, Anna, it's a fascinating conversation as well. I loved it listening to Marty and Gail, just sort of delving into what they think happened overnight and why we've got the size of this victory for Donald Trump. Good to have you with us, Anna. See you throughout the day. Listening in as well is Regina Vajanathan, former US correspondent, watching events unfold. Wasn't it interesting listening to Gail and Marty just explain how voters in Pennsylvania have been feeling? But to Anna's point, when people got into vote yesterday, she says the economy was top of mind. Now, we kind of know that, Regina, but there are also a lot of people who really do like Donald Trump. What do they tell you when you've been in America speaking to Trump supporters? What is it that they like about him? What is the thing that they say to you, appeals the most about him?
I think it's something that we see in politics around the world now. He's anti-establishment. I mean, in many ways, he's not, because he served in office for 4 years. But to the minds of his base, his silent majority, as they call themselves, he is an outsider. He is the businessman. He is the reality TV star. And in some ways, Kamala Harris, because she was pinned so much by her opponents, but also because she's still vice president, attached to the Biden administration, it was very hard for her. And you saw in interviews when she was asked the questions, how different are you going to be to Joe Biden? How are you going to do things in a different track? She sometimes struggled with that question because it's hard to uncouple yourself when you're currently sitting.
Na, ngayon po mga palangga, sasagutin ko lang po yung mga katanungan. Kanina kasi may nagtanong. Sir, makikialam pa ba ang ICC na ngayon ay iba na yung presidente? Yan ang maganda na katanungan. Alam nyo, dahil po ay alam naman natin si Donald Trump at si Tatay Digong, magkaganon yan eh. And then ang pinakaano dyan, dahil hindi natin alam, baka may po sila ni Joe Biden at saka si Marcos. Kasi alam naman ng taong bayan na marami pong kayamanan na tinatago ang mga Marcoses. Alam naman talaga ng taong bayan. So medyo mahirapan na po ngayon. At ito naman si Ontiveros at saka ito si Trililing, medyo mahirapan po sila. Kasi ngayon, nakita naman natin na mismo ang presidente sa Russia pumunta na. And then, ganun din ang presidente sa Ukraine, si Netanyahu sa Israel. Kasi alam kasi nila na si Donald Trump ayaw talaga ng gera. At ganun din ito si dating Pangulong Duterte. Ayaw talaga ng gera. Kasi kawawa kasi ang taong bayan eh. So, yun po yung napakalaki po na kaya nanalo si Donald Trump. So, ngayon, subaybayan po natin at like at share lang. Maraming salamat sa lahat po ng mga akbang na maisog, lalo na po sa mga political blogger na mga kasama po natin.
When you're currently sitting in, the vice president's role. And I think that's it, is that he played himself as the outsider, and there's no doubt about it. I've seen them both at rallies. He has an enormous amount of charisma, whether you agree with his policies or not. He is a showman. He knows how to work the crowds and the cameras. And he's given people a feeling. People that I spoke to said, look what he did with foreign policy. Look how he met Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. It's those moments that people take away with, and also the kind of thing that comes down to politics the world over, Lucy. Who would you rather have a drink with? And a lot of people that I met just felt that was Donald Trump.
And people felt that they were able to put aside the allegations of sexual misconduct. They were able to put aside the fact that he's a convicted felon, the fact that, you can do a fact check on a rally and he lies multiple times. This is something that the voters are able to just put aside, Regina. How do they justify that?
I'll bring you back to a conversation that I had with a group of Republican women in Georgia, which of course ended up going for Donald Trump. It was in the summer. Kamala Harris was doing a rally in town, and I asked them what they were thinking, and they said they didn't like his language. It was going back to 2016, the locker room talk. They described themselves as Reagan Republicans. He's their hero. But they didn't like Donald Trump. They don't like his rhetoric. So I asked them, well, who are you going to vote for? Are you going to go for Kamala Harris? And they said, well, we do like the idea of this country finally electing a woman, but we don't like her. And when I asked them, well, what don't you like about her? They wouldn't put their finger on it. They mentioned the economy, as we heard in that discussion there as well. But I think in the end, I like to call them hovering voters. These women, often, you know, the so-called soccer mums that we talk about a lot in US elections, would have gone into the voting booth. They would have thought, okay, we don't really like him, but then they think about their gas prices, they think about the border, and they put a cross in Trump. I mean, that's clearly what happened in some sense.
OK, Regina will be back with you shortly. But we are waiting to hear, of course, from Kamala Harris, yet to concede. She's yet to address her supporters. We're not quite sure when that's going to happen, but we are expecting it to be sometime today. She left quite dejected crowds, actually, when they left her watch party, and we heard that she wasn't going to appear before the final results came in. But we will, of course, keep across when she does appear. But let's look now at Donald Trump's path to victory and what happened in those 7 crucial swing states. Lewis joins us now from the newsroom, and he's been analysing the results as they've been coming in. Lewis.
Lucy, thank you. I'm going to start with the popular vote. Actually, just a simple number of Americans voted for each candidate. Kamala Harris here, just over 66 million. Donald Trump, 71 million plus. So a clear victory for Donald Trump in the popular vote, but that is just a moral victory. You can become president without getting the most votes of the actual voters across the country, and that's because it's decided actually by electoral college votes. Basically, you've got to win votes in each individual state to do that. Secret number is 270. Once you're past 270, you win and you are President-elect. Donald Trump has done that. You can see he's currently on 279 seats. The way he did that, the last win was Wisconsin. That's 10 electoral college votes. We're going to dig a little bit deeper to see the kind of patterns that happened across the country. If we go down here, we look at Milwaukee. You can see that's blue. Kamala Harris, Democrat. Significant win for her in that area. Urban area, that's to be expected, but just around outside these counties.
Imagine ang lalaki, grabe no, hindi ka makapaniniwala yung panalo ni Donald Trump. Kasi alam kasi ng Estados Unidos at alam po ng ibang bansa yung ano kasi ni Donald Trump, if I'm not mistaken, magkakapareho po sila ni dating Pangulong Duterte. Yung bang may tapang at panindigan at pagmamahal sa taong bayan. Kaya yun po dyan sa Huadcom. Anyway, si dating Pangulong Duterte ay hindi po dadalo. Ayun na, no? And then, grabe yung ginagawa po nila. So, hindi na nila magagawa yan kasi tungkol sa ICC, kasi iba na po ang presidente. So, pakinggan po natin, patuloy po tayo.
But just around outside these counties, outside all Donald Trump, plenty of people were watching these, and Kamala Harris was unable to improve on Joe Biden's showing in those areas, and indeed dropped below in some, and that meant Donald Trump was able to win. Another quick example to give you. Going to look now at what happened in Pennsylvania. Another county within it is Erie County. It's known as a bellwether county, so basically it's always pretty close. Whatever way it actually decides to vote is usually the way the whole country votes. And here you can see that's what happened to Donald Trump taking it back in 2020. Joe Biden, the Democrats, took it before that, 2016, Donald Trump. So Erie County holding up its reputation as that bellwether state. Right, let's take a look at where we are in terms of the latest to not be actually certain on any results. Basically, you can see this sea of red. Okay, let's start with the 4 states that have been projected already as a Donald Trump win. We know about those. But these 3 here, we do not have projections yet, but you can see Donald Trump ahead in all of them. So let's look now at how, through the night, Donald Trump actually did it. Let's look at those 7 swing states that coming into this election basically looked like they could go either way. Well, pretty quickly, they started going Donald Trump's way. Let's start down here, North Carolina, Georgia. Kamala Harris at this point still in the race, but then came Pennsylvania. It's a crucial state because it's got 19 electoral college votes. That's the most out of any swing state. And now we have Donald Trump on 266. He basically just needs one more of these swing states. And that happened, as we mentioned, with Wisconsin. That took him over the line. That's basically the story of the night. But it wasn't just presidential elections taking place. Let's take a look at Congress, because clearly the president's power is greatly enhanced if Congress backs him, backs the laws and changes he wants to make, and isn't if it doesn't. So the Senate, you need a simple majority of 51 to be in control of the Senate. And look at that number, 52. Republicans have it already, with some seats still up for grabs. So let's take a look at the map. Now, only a third of seats in the Senate are up for grabs right now, so ignore the grey here. That's where no elections are taking place. But you can see the red stripes here, Ohio, West Virginia, Montana. These are wins for Republicans. That's taken them up to 52 so far. And just finally, Lucy, just for completeness, we'll look at the House. 218 seats you need there. This is the lower chamber. Republicans on 203. It'll be a while before we know the results there. But Donald Trump, in his speech a few hours ago, declaring that the Republicans have held on to the House. Whatever way you look at it, a very good evening for the president-elect, Donald Trump.
Indeed. Lewis, thank you so much. He is the first former US president to face criminal charges. Donald Trump has, for much of 2024, faced 4 simultaneous prosecutions. And these are allegations that range from his attempt to cover up a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels during his 2016 campaign, to his attempts to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Now, President-elect, what does this result mean for these legal cases? Well, let's speak now to Jason Tuchinski, who is a partner at Holtzman Vogel and a Republican election lawyer. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. I've just been looking at some of the top Google searches from around the world following the result. And a lot of people are asking this question about the legal cases. So we'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, can I just get your reaction as a Republican to the result?
I mean, the results are absolutely stunning. Given the pre-election polling, I think a lot of us thought we were going to be in a lot of post-election legal contests around the country, and it does not look like that's going to happen.
It's been peaceful as well. We've had a result that was much quicker than people were expecting. So do you expect that to be the case? Because we had been painting a picture of these teams of lawyers in all the swing states ready to take some of this to court. That's just not going to happen.
At least not at the presidential level. I mean, I have done a lot of work in elections, and a person I was on a panel with a few years ago said, you know, I'd like to repeat the election administrator's prayer, dear God, don't let this election be close. And it appears, at least at the presidential level, that this was not a close election.
Okay, so what happens to these cases that are against Donald Trump at the moment?
So the criminal cases by the federal government probably go away completely very quickly after he takes office. The state cases will probably be paused during the duration of his presidency because there's a series of laws that essentially say, in most cases, civil and criminal claims against the president in state court essentially will get postponed. So, for example, the precedent is, frankly, Bill Clinton and some of his legal troubles that he had when he was president. You know, a lot of those got postponed, but, you know, he did sit for a deposition in a civil case while he was president. So the civil cases and the criminal cases might proceed, but on a much slower track than if he were not president of the United States.
I think for people watching around the world, this is confusing because it's to do with US law as well. But the one that people are going to remember is the hush money payments case, convicted of falsifying records related to hush money. Now, that is the first one because we are expecting a sentencing to take place later this month, I think November the 26th. What will happen there?
I suspect that's going to get postponed while the president's lawyers and the lawyers for the state of New York figure out what they're going to do with that case. I mean, it certainly is inconceivable that a state judge in New York could really impose penalties against the sitting president of the United States. So,
what are his options? What are the judge's options?
Delay. And appellate review is probably in the cards as well by the state courts in New York. So I think those are kind of the two things that I expect.
Could you explain to us
probably most likely.
Okay, Jason, can you explain to us as well what happened in the Supreme Court, the ruling about former presidents being entitled to a degree of immunity from criminal prosecution and what that actually now means?
Sure. So essentially what the Supreme Court said is if, in a post-election context, you're looking at criminal charges against a president, you have to determine whether or not it was within the scope of official duties. So, for example, I think the reason that the Supreme Court did what it did was that the lower court kind of went too far and was too categorical and said former presidents are never protected from criminal liability. And that doesn't really seem to be the case. Like, I'll give you a great example. There was controversy over when President Obama was president, and he launched a drone strike, I believe, in Yemen that killed 1 or 2 Americans, as a result of the drone strike. I don't think anybody believes that he should be prosecuted for murder because he ordered that drone strike in Yemen. But on the other hand, if he had taken a bribe to launch that drone strike that killed the Americans, there would be a different sort of calculation. And I think what the Supreme Court was saying is, the lower courts, prosecutors, and the trial courts need to look at the context of what it is a former president is accused of doing to determine whether or not it was in the scope of their official duties or not.
So this does not then provide absolute immunity, because there are Democrats who are worried this just allows Donald Trump now to do whatever he wants. There are no guardrails.
I don't think that's an accurate reading of the Supreme Court decisions. I think that's an exaggeration.
All right, Jason, really good to get your thoughts. Jason Torchinsky, thank you very much for joining us, just taking us through all of those legal cases that Donald Trump has been facing. Well, alongside the presidential race, Americans have also been voting in congressional elections, as we were hearing from Lewis as well. Mr. Trump's future control of the levers of government appear to have received a major boost, with the Republicans projected to win control of the Senate. In the House, though, the House of Representatives, where all 435 seats were up for grabs, Republicans are also leading there. Several races, though, are still undecided. And if the Republicans do end up controlling the House, Senate and the White House, it will grant Mr. Trump broad powers to pass laws. Regina is still with me. There's a lot here that needs explaining. So can you give us the basics, then?
Well, first of all, we talk about this being a real clean sweep for Donald Trump, because he didn't just win the Electoral College, all those contests that Lewis was talking about in all of the different states to get past the 270 mark. He also won the popular vote. So the national vote across the country, he got the highest number of votes in that. He's also won the Senate, and at the moment it looks like he could win the House of Representatives. We don't know yet. Now, it's the Senate and the House of Representatives, which are the kind of two houses of Congress. They pass laws. So a law will start in the House of Representatives, a bit like the Houses of Parliament here in the UK, and then it will move on to the Senate. Now, they have got the Senate 51-40. So they haven't crossed the 60 mark, which, without wishing to go into the minutiae of what a filibuster is, makes it a lot easier for a party to pass policies.
Because I think, Regina, what people want to know is, does this mean that all of Trump's policies are going to sail through now? It's going to be easy for him.
It's going to be easier. Without crossing the 60 mark, there'll still be an opportunity for challenges in the Senate. But yes, it does embolden him. It does make it a lot easier. And the entire victory does, in a way. You know, he, in many ways, has confounded what a lot of his critics thought he could do. He has a huge mandate, not just because he's likely to get both houses. I mean, as I say, let's see how the House goes. But also because he's got the popular vote. So in other elections, sometimes a president will will the Electoral College, and his opponents will say, well, you didn't win the popular vote. So he can say that now, and it does give him a freer range to put in some of his policy agenda. Now, it's unclear what exactly he will go for, but there has been a document that a lot of people have been talking about, of course, Lucy, Project 2025, which was written by a number of his advisors. He says he's not going to bring that project into office, but if he does, at least draw on some of it. It's a very right-wing conservative agenda there.
We haven't heard from Kamala Harris. I think there was a lot of disappointment we heard from her supporters that she told them to go home. I just wonder, Regina, what you think the timing will be of that today, what are the considerations that are being made at the moment about when she will appear and what she will say?
I think there will definitely be a lot of shock in her camp. We've heard from one of her co-chairs who told everyone to...
Actually, I'm going to let you continue that thought, but let's have a listen to her co-chair speaking.
I want to say good evening to all of the Harris campaign, the campaign family. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the promise of America. We still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the Vice President tonight, but you will hear from her tomorrow. She will be back here tomorrow to address not only the HU family, not only to address her supporters, but to address the nation.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough moment for her. What do you think Democrats are feeling at the moment about her campaign, about the amount of time that she had to run, the fact that, you know, when Joe Biden stepped back, it possibly didn't give her enough time. He should have done that earlier. What sort of things are Democrats feeling today about what's happened?
I mean, Lucy, there's definitely going to be an inquest, because I think just a few days ago, there definitely was momentum in the Democratic campaign and a feeling that she could do it. I mean, she had a bit of a boost after the convention, after she was officially confirmed as the Democratic nominee. Then I think the feeling was that it really was close. But again, it goes back to 2016 as well. Did they get their polling wrong? Did they get their ground game wrong? They really did have a very strong get out the vote operation, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, where she needed to win to get a path to the White House.
The Democrats were much more organised, that their grassroots movement was a lot stronger than Donald Trump's. They had more money at a grassroots level. Lots of questions there too.
And I think one of the other things from watching her when she started after the convention, started kind of doing the media rounds, doing those rallies, and as I say, I went to one of her early rallies. One of the criticisms of her was that she wasn't giving enough interviews. And another criticism was that she wasn't clearly spelling out her policies. Now, her supporters said there was a double standard, and they would say, look, Donald Trump takes to a stage, he sometimes waffles and goes off on tangents, and it's not always clear what his policies are.
But then he will articulate a policy with one phrase and sort of nails them. That's what people remember.
Exactly. And then it comes back to what we've talked about throughout this morning, which is that the economy was the number one concern. And I remember one of her first policy press conferences was about how she was going to eliminate price gouging in supermarkets and keep prices down, which is, of course, a really big concern, because even though some economists will say things are getting back on track when it comes to the US economy, people aren't feeling it. But she wasn't able to communicate that in a way that people understood. Well, that's certainly what a lot of people said, including her critics. So there was a disconnect somewhere. Now, was it partly because she just wasn't as au fait with the art of campaigning? Yes, she ran a primary a long time ago, but that wasn't in this season. And many will say, when they have this post-mortem in the Democratic Party, should Joe Biden have stepped aside a lot sooner and given her a better chance?
And Virginia, I know you have some pretty close sources within the Harris camp.
I do.
And they've been messaging you. What have they
Yeah, so I've interviewed her uncle before, and he just sent me a message just now. I asked him how he was feeling. He said he feels pretty down, not just for my niece's loss, but for the course of international laws and humanitarian concerns during the Trump presidency, and what he says is the irreparable damage that it may cause. I mean, you know, there will be a lot of people in America. We obviously have acknowledged the momentous moment this is for Donald Trump and for his supporters, and it's huge. But there will be many people who aren't just upset and disappointed that this wasn't a moment that a woman was finally elected in the United States, but also a woman of colour. She's half South Asian and her father was Jamaican, so half Jamaican origin and half South Asian. And there will be many people who will say, well, where does this leave the kind of path of diversity in America?
Yeah, Regina, thank you so much. Not only that, but also people asking, where does this leave America's relationship with the rest of the world? And we have been getting reaction in from world leaders. It's been mixed. There's been jubilation in Israel and other right-wing governments, tempered by some elsewhere, but lots of people are wondering what's going to happen with some of those conflicts that are happening in the world at the moment, the war in Ukraine being one of them, and the relationship that President Trump has had with President Putin. So let's bring you the views now of our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who is in Sochi.
Well, it feels like the Kremlin is going out of its way to give the impression that it's not excited at all by Donald Trump's victory. A Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said that, as far as he knows, Vladimir Putin has no plans to congratulate Donald Trump. He said America is an unfriendly country which is involved directly and indirectly in a war with Russia. Now, I think this pouring cold water onto the Trump victory is partly the result of what happened in the first Trump term, when the Kremlin had very high hopes that Donald Trump would improve US-Russian relations. It didn't work out. Having said that, there is no doubt that what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail will have been much appreciated by the Kremlin. He didn't criticize Vladimir Putin, unlike Kamala Harris, who called Vladimir Putin a murderous dictator. And he seemed to question the scale of US military assistance to Kiev. So that will have gone down well with the Kremlin. Certainly here in the mountains above Sochi at the political discussion club I'm at right now, political pundits, political scientists seem to be very happy that Donald Trump has won the election and looking forward to him coming back to the White House. One quite prominent political scientist with Kremlin connections told me that he thinks that under Donald Trump, the United States will retreat from its status as a global superpower.
Steve Rosenberg there in Sochi. One other thing we'll be discussing in the coming hour here on BBC News is what's happening in terms of the markets, shares in US companies, and also the value of the dollar have spiked upwards as Donald Trump swept to victory. Also interesting, the value of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin also soaring to a new record, and shares in American banks jumping. So we'll keep across that for you as well. But first, let's remind ourselves about how this astonishing evening, this historic evening, played out in the United States.
State of North Carolina coming into us, a projection that we can make at this hour. Here we go. North Carolina projected for Donald Trump. All those rallies, all that footfall from the Trump campaign in North Carolina, especially the past 5 days, appears to have paid off.
This is huge. This is the second swing state now that has been projected as a win for Donald Trump. This is Georgia, and it's 16 electoral votes.
We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the Vice President tonight.
Major projection to bring to you now, a really, really huge one. We can project Pennsylvania for Donald Trump.
We came in with high expectations, and once again, the polls are wrong.
And I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
We're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country.
That projection coming to us from our CBS News partners. Donald Trump, America's 47th president.
We're going to take a look at how Donald Trump did it through the numbers. The numbers tell the story. 279 is the key number at the moment, well over 270. 270 is the number of electoral college votes that you need to become president. The way the president is elected is by getting those electoral college votes by winning states. Just a quick reminder, red states there are Republican, Donald Trump, blue are Democrat. Kamala Harris. The final one that took him over that 270 mark was Wisconsin, 10 Electoral College votes. Let's look inside Wisconsin. We're going to look at one county and specifically here, Sauk County. Trump winning, only a few hundred votes in it actually, but compare that to last time round, Joe Biden won it. Trump didn't. Flipping that over, told the story about how Donald Trump, now president-elect, did it. So, how did the night pan out? You may remember before the election, people talking about those swing states. We had 7 swing states. Here, they're in grey. So go back to the beginning of the night. Donald Trump took North Carolina first, pretty quickly, Georgia afterwards. Kamala Harris, at this point, not out of it, but then came Pennsylvania. Absolutely crucial. 19 Electoral College votes, nearly gets Donald Trump all the way just there. And then we had the final one, Wisconsin, which took him over the line. You can there are still some bits of grey here. We don't have the projected results for everything yet. Let's look at the latest. These 7 swing states, we were expecting them perhaps beforehand to be a mixture of blue and red. Whoosh. Lots and lots of red, as you can see. The one with the ticks are the ones we've already had projections for. Trump projected to win. These are what we're still waiting on. And you can see Donald Trump ahead in all of them. Arizona, only 62% of the vote counted there, so park that one for the moment. Now, it's not just the presidential election that we've been following, also elections for Congress. 2 houses, the Senate, House of Representatives. We'll come to the House of Representatives in just a moment. Senate, 100 seats, simple maths. You need 51 for a majority, and look at that, Republicans on 52 already. Quick look at the map here. Now, they're not electing all 100 seats. They do about a third each time, and you can see here, so ignore the grey, that's seats where there are no election. But these stripy ones here, Republican wins, Ohio, West Virginia, and Montana as well, the most recent one. Coming back quickly just on the House of Representatives, we don't have a result definitively there. We need 218 for a majority, neither side on it. 203 for Republicans. They have made some gains. Donald Trump, you may remember in that speech, claimed that they have held on to the House of Representatives. We don't have that at the moment. But going back to the presidency, one final cherry on the icing on the cake for Donald Trump. He's also won the popular vote, just a simple number of Americans who voted, 66 million or so for Kamala Harris, 71 million for Donald Trump.
America has voted, and Donald Trump has won a second term in the White House, taking both the popular vote and the all-important Electoral College. His Republican Party now controls the Senate, and while the full House results are not yet known, Mr. Trump said America had given him an unprecedented mandate. From London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump wins the U.S. presidential election, saying his second term in office will be a new golden age for America.
This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
And I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
Jubilant supporters celebrate. Donald Trump will be only the second person in history to serve as U.S. president for 2 non-consecutive terms. It was a crushing night for Kamala Harris and her supporters, who left her campaign headquarters in Washington after the party was cancelled. We're going to bring you all the latest international reaction as well to Donald Trump's historic win. Plus, with the value of the world's biggest cryptocurrency markedly up, we're going to look at how the financial markets have responded to the result. Welcome home to our continuing coverage of the US election result. And Donald Trump has completed one of the most remarkable comebacks in political history after securing victory in the US presidential election. Success in the swing state of Wisconsin took him past the 270 electoral college votes required to defeat his opponent Kamala Harris. He also has a clear lead in the popular vote. Mr. Trump becomes the oldest man to be elected and only the second person to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in the White House. Well, let's take you straight to Washington now. We can join my colleague Anna Foster, who is there for us. We'll go to Anna in a moment, but let's take you to Florida, where he addressed jubilant supporters Donald Trump and said that Americans had given him an unprecedented mandate, and he promised a new golden age for the country. Here are the highlights.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
We also heard from Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, who spoke after the president-elect declared victory.
Well, Mr. President, I appreciate you allowing me to join you on this incredible journey. I thank you for the trust that you placed in me. And I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America. And under President Trump's leadership, we're never going to stop fighting for you, for your dreams, for the future of your children. And after the greatest political comeback in American history, we're going to lead the greatest economic comeback in American history under Donald Trump's leadership.
We're going to be bringing you reaction from right across the US and around the world. So let's hear from Randy Richardville, who is a former Michigan State Senate Majority Leader, still waiting for a final result from that swing state. And we asked him when we could expect to get it.
Well, the Michigan Secretary of State said it will probably be sometime late today, maybe even dribble into tomorrow. So, but I think the numbers are strong enough that it's been conceded that Michigan obviously has gone with Donald Trump for the second time. It was an interesting day because we changed the laws here in Michigan to allow people to vote for 9 consecutive days. So the polls were open, which made it so much easier for people to show up and vote. Now, there was some concern about the potential of fraud and those kinds of things. But the turnout yesterday with a beautiful 70-plus degree day in November, a lot of people showed up, and some people didn't even make up their mind, I don't think, until yesterday. The unpredictability of Donald Trump's, sweeping these swing seats is surprising to say the least. And the fact that he went out and won the national popular vote, I think, was surprising to a lot of people too. But he really has his work cut out for him, doesn't he? Because when you look at the base voters on the Republican Party, about 30% of the country is strong Republican, about 30% is strong Democrat. And so now you got that 40% in the middle. And we're such a polarized nation at this point that the real question of Donald Trump's leadership isn't so much whether he can lead or he can run the country from the White House. It's whether he can unite this country and, in fact, create a presence in the world where the rest of the world looks and says, we trust the United States, we trust Donald Trump, we think that he provides a strength for his allies. We've got trade deficits and other kinds of issues that are mostly economic in nature. But I think the world is taking a look and saying, is this the same Donald Trump that was elected 8 years ago, or is this a new person? And I think a lot of people decided, after the assassination attempt and the fact that, he got up and fight, let's keep going. He rallied the troops, so to speak, and created a foundation, a strength in his base.
Well, 8 years after his stunning upset of Hillary Clinton, 4 years after Joe Biden evicted him from the White House, the former president is about to return to power on the back of a victory that swept across the key early voting battleground states and improved on his electoral margins in much of America. He claimed what he called an unprecedented and powerful mandate to govern. Gary O'Donoghue looks now at how this extraordinary political comeback has come about.
4 years ago, Donald Trump left the White House without even attending Joe Biden's inauguration, his attempt to overturn the election having failed. But now he's back, making history as only the second president to win 2 non-consecutive terms in office. It was more than 9 years ago when Donald Trump entered the political fray, upending the Republican Party and winning its nomination for the 2016 presidential election, with, to many, shocking rhetoric that would become his trademark.
They're bringing crime, they're rapists.
But to the surprise of many, perhaps even the candidate himself, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton and at his inauguration continued with the same dark tone.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
At home and abroad, his presidency was a controversial one. He battled with the courts over a Muslim travel ban, over separating migrants from their children at the border, and was investigated by a special counsel over Russian influence, something he called a witch hunt and a hoax. He also became only the 3rd president in history to be impeached over accusations of holding up military aid to Ukraine for his own political ends, though the Senate did not convict him. A booming economy was brought to a sudden standstill when the coronavirus pandemic hit in his final year in office. Vaccines were produced in record time, but still more than 1 million Americans died of COVID-19. Donald Trump himself was struck down by the virus, but recovered, returning to the White House and to fight for his re-election. But he refused to accept defeat, erroneously claiming that the election had been stolen.
And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
His supporters stormed the Capitol. The violence shocked America and the world. After the January the 6th riots, he became the only US president to have been impeached twice. Out of office, he survived scandals that would have ended most political careers. He faced multiple court cases, both criminal and civil, and was convicted of covering up hush money payments to a porn star. Running again, he steamrolled his Republican opponents
The total initiative.
and mocked Joe Biden during their debate over the president's performance.
President Trump? I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
In July, Donald Trump came within inches of losing his life. A would-be assassin's bullet just grazed his ear, leading to a triumphant moment for the 45th president. Days later, he formally accepted the Republican nomination to take on Joe Biden, though before the week was out, President Biden had stood aside in favor of his vice president. Immediately, the personal attacks began, directed at her intelligence and her race.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black.
Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump are just moments.
A debate did little to shift the momentum either way, and the two remained neck and neck in the polls right up to Election Day. Donald Trump has vowed to begin the biggest ever deportation of migrants in history. He's also promised to end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. He hasn't said how he will do either of these things. He's also said he'll take revenge on his political opponents. America and the world is in for some uncertain times. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Washington.
We can now take you live to Washington and join my colleague who is there, Anna Foster. Anna, you've been in Pennsylvania, you're now back in Washington, and I just wonder, as people are digesting this news, whether there is a sense of surprise at the timing of all of this, how quick it's been and how definitive it's been.
I think you're absolutely right, Lucy. You know, even as recently as yesterday, election officials were talking about how this was going to take time. They were saying, wait, even the state of Pennsylvania, as you say, that I was in yesterday, they were making the point that they were going to do this well, they were going to do this properly. And if that was the case, then you could well expect it to take a few days, particularly if it was a tight race, the tight race that all of those polls were predicting. But, you know, you look at the way things are now, it's just after 9 o'clock in the morning here in Washington, D.C. The sun is beating down already. They're expecting record hot temperatures today, and a far hotter day than anybody had expected politically. They expected today to be about getting some of those results through, to be about, you know, rolling the pitch for a result that might have come tomorrow. I think they were expecting it sooner than 2020, but the speed and the emphatic nature of Donald Trump's win has really made waves across the US, and Donald Trump secured that historic victory after winning several of those crucial swing states, the places that we've been talking about for so long. North Carolina was the first of those battleground states to be called, and of course Donald Trump then went on to win Georgia, and Pennsylvania, I think, was the decisive moment when really he came out and started to claim victory. Let's get reaction to one of the results from those swing states and speak to Siobhan O'Duffy-Millen, who's part of the board administering elections in North Carolina. Siobhan, thank you for joining us here on BBC News.
Thanks, Anna. I'm glad to be here. I think our process went really well, but our result may not have been what everybody wanted.
Yeah, you're a Democrat supporter. We'll talk about that, about how you feel about that result in just a second. But as you said there, the first thing you said was about the process, because things are different here now. There would have been a time when the process wouldn't even have been remarked upon. It would have been assumed that the process would go well, but things have really changed. So how did that sort of level of scrutiny and questioning of the electoral process feel to you?
Well, I'm really proud of our team at the Board of Election. I think we really rose to the occasion, especially after Tropical Storm Helene, which was just a month ago, destroyed a lot of the infrastructure out in the western part of the state. But despite that, we only had 7 voting places yesterday that had to be conducted in tents. And before that, during the early voting period, we had 76 out of 80 early voting sites open just as normal. And in fact, the turnout in the western part of the state in early voting was a little bit higher than the turnout in the rest of the state. I believe it was 58% versus 57%. So I'm really pleased that with the help of National Guard and emergency management, we were able to stand up such a strong response and bring voting to the people.
Yeah, and it sounds like your levels of engagement were really high there as well.
I think our turnout overall, it looks like it was around 75%. You know, so that's it's going to meet or perhaps exceed what it was in 2020.
And in terms of the speed at which we got this result, is that something that took you by surprise, not even necessarily just in your own state, but across the board?
Well, actually, I felt it was going slowly last night. It seemed like we had such a calm day, very few disputes, very friendly. And then towards the end of the night, a couple of polling places had lines out at University of North Carolina in Charlotte, had a line of kids waiting to vote until 1:30 in the morning. So our results did drag in for that and some other reasons. But yeah, we called it around, I believe, 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. So yeah, that was good for us.
Yeah, and that moment for you, you know, as you said, you're a Democrat. It was not the result that you wanted. Why do you think Kamala Harris's message didn't resonate with voters?
Oh, gosh, that's a huge question. I think we're all going to be debating that for days and weeks. You know, did women not come out strong enough? You can point the finger at, was turnout not strong enough among this group or that group? I would have liked to have seen it a little bit stronger. My little county here in middle of North Carolina had an 80% turnout 4 years ago, and we had a 75% turnout. So, I think we're going to really need to dig into those numbers and find out what was the perhaps enthusiasm gap.
That's one way of putting it. Siobhan, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time this morning. And,
thank you.
We saw the mood last night at Kamala Harris's headquarters in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, not far from here. People had been flooding in all evening. They were excited. It was a really charged atmosphere that changed markedly when those results started to go against her as the evening went on. And this was the moment that Cedric Richmond, who is Harris's campaign co-chair, told those supporters that Kamala Harris would not be addressing them on election night. Take a listen.
I want to say good evening to all of the Harris campaign, the campaign family. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the promise of America. We still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the vice president tonight, but you will hear from her tomorrow. She will be back here tomorrow to address not only the HU family, not only to address her supporters, but to address the nation.
Well, let me take you live now to the swing state of Georgia. We can speak to Melita Easters, who's in Atlanta, founder and executive director of the Georgia Win List. Now, that group had 77 Democratic women running in the election cycle in that particular state. Thanks for being with us here on BBC News. What is your reaction to that result, a historic result for Donald Trump that we've seen today?
We are all disappointed not to see a woman so well qualified as Kamala Harris defeated, but we are happy for the 6 new women who will serve in the Georgia General Assembly in January, all of them new faces, and we are also happy that all of our currently serving women who were in contested races won re-election, despite the fact that the Georgia GOP had poured millions into campaigns trying to defeat them. So even though there is a dark cloud for the top of the ticket, there are bright spots and silver linings for the women down ballot.
I wonder, Melita, because people have been having this discussion here this morning, was it about the fact that some Americans still couldn't bring themselves to vote for a woman, or was it purely down to personalities and politics? What do you think?
I believe that those who have long held power, what I call the stale, pale patriarchy, are not willing to let go of it easily. And so, yes, there are many women who voted against Kamala Harris, but all women must come together because it is past time for the United States to have a woman president. And we have turned down 2 highly qualified women who have been at the top of the ticket as Democratic nominees in the past. And so as women and as Democrats, we must re-examine our messaging and find ways to heal the divide and reach across party lines to hone the message so that a woman can win the White House in the near future.
And what about the policy promises, Melita, as well? Because there were clearly issues. I know that time and effort is now going to be spent working out what went wrong. But just as an initial assessment, when you look at that message that Kamala Harris was delivering, where do you think it fell short?
I think it is hard to sell any message against a message that has stoked fear for 4 years. And if you think about it, Kamala Harris had only a few months to develop and sell her message after President Biden stepped down from the ticket. And so it's hard to press against the fear that has been stoked for several years by Donald Trump following his defeat from 4 years ago. But I have confidence that the American people will work to heal our country. And I believe we can all take some lessons from your late queen by carrying on. And I personally plan to dust off a copy of Winston Churchill's speeches and find some inspiration in some of his works during Britain's darkest hours.
Melita, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time this morning from Atlanta in Georgia. Well, let's remind ourselves of what happened overnight here, of Donald Trump's path to victory through those battleground states. My colleague Lewis Vaughan-Jones has been analysing the results as they've been coming in. Lewis, a huge amount of data, loads of information. Break it down for us.
Anna, thank you. I'll do just that. First number for you, 279. That's how many Electoral College votes Donald Trump currently has, more than the 270 that he needed to win the presidency. Now, those swing states, those battleground states that you just mentioned, there are 7 of them coming into this election. They were the ones that basically both sides had a good chance, we thought, of winning. Now, take a look at these. Whoosh, a wall of red. Republican red, Donald Trump red. The first 4 of the swing states that we've had projected, Donald Trump projected winner, Trump projected winner, Trump projected winner. You get the idea. Down here, what we're still waiting for, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona. Swing states, we don't have the results yet. Trump ahead, Trump ahead, Trump ahead. That gives you an idea of what happened, how Donald Trump did it. Let's go to the most recent swing state that has just been called in the last few hours, projected Donald Trump victory, and that was Wisconsin. That took him over the 270 line. Let's take a look here, and this hopefully will tell some of the story of the voting across the country. So if we look at, for example, let's dig into Sauk County here. Donald Trump wins it by just over a percentage point or so, just a few hundred votes actually. But if you go back, last election, look at that. It was Biden who took it. And that flip there, just a few percentage points in, just a few hundred votes in it, hugely significant. And actually, even more common story is things like this. If we look at Milwaukee, blue there for the Democrats, urban areas, tend to do well in urban areas, and then just around it, if we look at these areas, huge numbers for Donald Trump, 68% here, 55%, 59%. And basically the story is that Donald Trump in these red, more suburban or rural areas held firm, did well, potentially increasing by a couple of percentage points. Kamala Harris was unable to improve on the result that Joe Biden managed to achieve, and therefore we have the result that we had. Not the only elections taking place, though. Crucially, Congress, because how much power Donald Trump will have in large parts depend on whether he has a Congress that backs his laws and legislation. 2 houses here. We'll come to the House of Representatives in just a moment. Let's start with the Senate, because 52 Republican seats in the Senate. Now, you only need 51 for a majority, so they have taken control from the Democrats already. Let's have a quick look at how they did that, because it's interesting and could be revealing too. Ignore the grey here. That's for seats where no election is taking place. 34 seats up for grabs. But if you look over here, Ohio, West Virginia, flipped. So the stripe there means they've taken them, Republicans, Donald Trump's party, have taken them from the Democrats, Montana as well, and we still have more to be called. So we wait and see the final numbers in the Senate, but that is very good news for the Republicans and Donald Trump. And then over here on the House, we're not close to a result yet. 203 on the Republican side, 218 is the magic number down there. That's what they need. You may have heard Donald Trump a little earlier talk about the fact that he believes the Republicans have retained the House. Too early to call that yet. Now, let's have a look at the presidential race again, just to remind you, these 7 swing states that we thought potentially all could go either way. The polling had them in the margin of error, so we weren't to know. But let's just run you through exactly how Donald Trump did it. So you have the grey states here. These are the 7 swing states there towards the middle, undeclared at this point. And then the first one came through for Donald Trump. North Carolina, not as close as many people thought. Then Georgia down there. Suddenly, things look like they're swinging towards Donald Trump. At this point, though, Kamala Harris still in it. Then came Pennsylvania. Crucial for so many reasons. Main one being, actually, it's got 19 electoral college votes, the largest of all these swing states. So it's absolutely one that both sides wanted to win. Donald Trump did. That took him to 266, just 4 short. So now any number, any one of the remaining swing states and the presidency would be his. And then Wisconsin took him over the top, as we know. Since then, Alaska was gone as well. And then we're still waiting for the other remaining swing states. But just to remind you, this is where it stands right now. It's all red, looking very good for President-elect Donald Trump.
Lewis, thank you. So striking, isn't it? When you see the map like that broken down as red and blue, it really shows you the scale of the victory that Donald Trump has achieved here in the last few hours. Let's speak to Mary Frances Berry, who's Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Berry, thank you for joining us. Of course, Pennsylvania, that key big prize swing state. And I think overnight, that was the moment that the momentum really changed, I think, in Donald Trump's favor, didn't it? When we had those first projections that he was going to take Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. Part of it was that she didn't pick Josh Stein, the governor, as VP as opposed to Walz. And I understand why she did that. And part of it was she was not able to turn the Latino vote, Puerto Ricans especially, with all the hoopla about what some comedian said and who said what. And more people were concerned about the economy. There were a lot of people who thought that when Trump stole Reagan's slogan, "You're better off now than you were 4 years ago," and they looked back and said, "Hey, I was better off." And also all this scare tactics about terrible things he's going to do to us. He didn't do any of that while he was in office to me. So therefore, and the abortion issue worked, but it didn't work as strongly as they thought. So that was the moment when we knew that he would win. My view is that the Democrats had hubris, and I feel sorry for Kamala Harris, because she, in this episode of replacing the candidate, and then Biden, and then he's out, and then all of this back and forth, and having to put together a campaign in the short time that she had no alternative except to be the person who would not to be the candidate. But it turns out that in some places she did no better than Biden would have done. I'm not suggesting that Biden should have stayed, but then that little play of, once she was replaced, letting Biden stay there to try to run the country after you've already said that he's got some problems with decision making. So I think part of it was hubris. Part of it also was people didn't buy that narrative that he was, the ones who voted for, a danger to the republic, and we'd never have another election if he got in, because they said, hey, he was in office before and he never did that. So those kinds of tactics didn't work. And also that when women, on the gender gap, lots of women care about the abortion issue, but they also cared about the economy, they cared about the immigration issues, and they cared about all the rest of it. So I think the Democrats, in a sense, those who pulled the strings, outsmarted themselves in the otherwise we don't know. He had so many attacks on him and then he would survive. It was sort of like, no matter what you did to him, what the Democrats did to him, he would survive. And then you had the assassination attempts. You had all of these things that happened to him. He is a great entertainer. We know that, and he has been. And you can argue it, but a successful businessman, at least he's got money, lots of it, we think. But in fact, he was able to bounce back. And also that what they kept saying in the media, she had the mainstream media on her side, of course, Kamala Harris did. But what they kept saying, Trump should stay on message. He should not entertain the crowds by saying all this stuff. The crowds came out because he was entertaining them. And then he would finally get to his message. So he's just a survivor, I guess you would.
Okay. Thank you. But of course, it's been watched closely by leaders and nations right around the world. And so far, reaction to his re-election has been mixed, as you might expect. Jubilation in Israel and other right-wing governments, but that's been, of course, tempered by caution elsewhere as well. So let's get some of those key countries. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has more from Sochi on the Kremlin's reaction to the Trump victory.
Well, it feels